This is TWiT.
A guy, his name is Dylan, lived up the road a bit, grew up in Sonoma County. He's 30 years old now. When he was about 3, the family bought him a computer. He really took to it. He loved it. Wasn't a great student. It wasn't until he got in that first robotics program in high school that he kind of really thought about technology. It was kind of, this is really cool. He went, he couldn't get into Cal. He didn't have great grades in school. He did get into Brown University. I'm not sure how, but he got into Brown University. So he went there. You may remember a few years ago, a guy named Peter Thiel, who had a little bit of money, because Peter Thiel was an early investor in Facebook. Do you remember this, Mike? You probably remember. About 2012, Thiel put together a fund saying, if you drop out of college, I'll give you $100,000.
Yes, and the HBO Silicon Valley series mocked that as well. They had a character in there who was a VC who was like, no, don't go to college. It's a terrible idea. Yeah, that was ill-advised.
So Dylan took the money. He was in his junior year at Brown. And with a friend of his, also at Brown, they started a little company. Their first idea was drones to monitor traffic laws. Flopped. So they thought, what else could we do? And they thought, well, maybe there's not a business here. I don't know, but we got a little money. Let's design a web-based graphics design program. They called it Figma, a design platform for teams who build products together. Didn't make a lot of money at first. They were above a gas station, above a bar, a small office. It got so noisy after 3 o'clock on Fridays, they all had to go home because the bar was just too loud to get any work done. Until a few years ago, he was, living in the Mission District in San Francisco, buying $1 cup of coffees on his way to work, working really hard. But things started to turn about 4 years ago. They were able to raise money, enough money, in fact, to value the company, I think, at about $100 million. Which is good money, right? Then a few years after that, it continued, I think mostly because of COVID.
COVID.
Yeah. They had a valuation round that got them to, $10 billion. Still, a lot of times founders raise this money, but that doesn't mean they're going to live a lavish lifestyle. But that was good. And that COVID really helped this little design company do very well. Adobe started to notice because this company started to take money out of Adobe's pockets. In fact, last year, $400 million in revenue. And you have to think that most of that money that went to Figma was money that Adobe didn't make on Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign. So Adobe started to think, well, we got to do something about this guy. This week, Adobe announced they're buying Dylan Field's company for $20 billion. One of the largest acquisitions, I think the largest acquisition of a web company ever. He has 10%. He's got $2 billion, half of it in cash, half of it in Adobe stock. That's too bad about the Adobe stock part, but because Adobe stock tanked as a result. But this is one of those stories where, you know what? This guy did all right. And I'm kind of happy. Now, it's not a done deal. They still have to get through regulator approval and all that, but
it'll probably go through, and timing is everything, because basically the reason I'm certain the reason that Adobe really wants this company is that right now, with remote work, with digital nomads, many of whom are digital creators and designers, and with the need to collaborate in the cloud like this offering enables, that's where it's at. And Adobe is nowhere in that space. And so Adobe is still living in the past of when everybody shows up to an office. And those days are over, essentially, for many, many creators. And so this is a golden idea. It's one of those ideas that's exactly the right idea at exactly the right time. And they are really, it's really paying off for this guy.
Certainly better than drones to monitor reckless driving. I think that was a good pivot.
It's funny that, remember, Bill Gates' first startup was also
Trafo
driving Trafo data.
Yeah.
But I think if there had been drones, maybe it would have been drone-related
So the
traffic.
market really didn't like this. I think Adobe's stock went down something like 17%. Yeah. But In a way, look, I don't like the subscription model. I've found other programs to use in Photoshop and Lightroom, but Adobe had to do that. They had to move from the boxed software to subscription, as much as people didn't like it. And I think as much as people don't like the idea of them buying Figma, it's probably an existential crisis for them. You think, Caroline?
Acquisitions is what Adobe does best. If you recall, Photoshop was an acquisition.
That's true.
I think what the market didn't like is the evaluation, not necessarily the purchase itself.
$20 billion.
Yeah. I think that, had they waited, say, 6 months as people settle into a more hybrid versus remote workplace, that evaluation could have been lower. I think that's what people are taking, a negative kind of take on the deal versus whether or not Adobe is doing the right thing. Because aside from what Mike was saying about, hybrid work is here to stay, it is also true that we all are more creators than we were before, right? Content has become part of what you need to come up with, no matter what job you have as a knowledge worker, right? And I think that's the other trend that we see that I think Adobe is taking, is looking at taking a chunk out, and not to have special skills. So you don't have to necessarily have people dedicated to, coming up with social media designs for your ads or your post, or, coming up with infographic for a new report that you've done. All of that is now part of, a writer's job, or especially for smaller companies where you don't necessarily have dedicated people doing that.
It really is perfect timing. You couldn't, this is a company that benefited hugely from COVID. But do you think that Adobe had to do this, Mike?
Well, I do. I don't think Adobe has it in them to create something that would be just like this and do it quickly enough, or I'm not even sure they could ever do it exactly like this. It's a pretty lean company, and it's a pretty, it's got a lot. It gets a lot of praise for its usability and its user interface and so on. Now, I suspect that the reason that the market isn't thrilled is that they don't trust Adobe to own this company in the right way. They're saying all the right things. They're saying we're going to keep it completely separate. We're going to keep the team in place. We're not going to change anything. We're not going to change the pricing. We're not going to do any of that stuff. But whenever a company acquires another company, they always say those sorts of things, and they might stick to it for a year or two. In 2 years, this guy is going to probably leave and start another company. His contract will be up. And after a year or 2 or 3 years, the promises, the mindset that they had when they made the acquisition is all gone. And they will use this, the people, the technology, the customers, and all that stuff in whatever way suits Adobe's interests and their shareholders and so on. So, the fact that they're saying they're going to keep the pricing, okay, they may or may not. They probably won't. In a few years, they'll probably jack it up and make it expensive like every other Adobe product. They may move to Adobe-like payment, subscription models and so on. But for the time being, I think it's a good move for Adobe, simply because this is where the world is, and it very well could be that this product could become Adobe's flagship product in 5 years. It's possible. Time will tell. Now, the best case scenario is they do a lot of integration so that Adobe tools work seamlessly within this environment, and that would be great. But I think it's good for everyone involved. I think it's likely that the regulators will allow it to go through, and I think it's kind of the only downside is a lot of the customers for Figma. One of the things they loved about it was that it was like
it was not Adobe.
Scrappy alternative.
It was
to
not Adobe. Yeah,
exactly.
They were
So
almost certainly refugees from Adobe, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a bummer for those people.
Well, is that good for Canva and Sketch and the other companies in the same arena?
I guess. I mean, probably. Who knows? The number of alternatives is sort of narrowing.
Yeah.
So.
And let me ask you, Alex, is it a good, because you cover business? Okay, so $20 billion.
Yeah.
That's a kind of a significant amount of money for a company that only has $4.5 billion in revenue last quarter. That's more than their annual revenue. Furthermore, it's a lot more than Figma makes. Its ARR last year was $400 million, as I said. It takes a lot of $400 million to get to $20 billion.
It absolutely does, but I don't think you should think about that in those terms. I don't think revenue is the number you want to use in this case. And I say that as someone who's a huge fan of using revenue multiples to value companies.
Yeah, don't you? Yeah, multiple of EBITDA. But this is a multiple. I can't remember. I saw the number like 50x. It's a huge.
It's 50x ARR for the end of Adobe's fiscal year, which ends November 30th. But what matters here more is Adobe bet roughly 13-14% of its market cap on Figma.
Huge.
Because it was worth like 170. It's being sold it's buying for 20. To me, that is actually a pretty reasonable chunk of the company to bet on something that could become the sort of threat that Mike's describing. And the thing that's been stressed to me by folks in the space is that it isn't like Figma was out to immediately cannibalize all of Adobe's revenues, but instead, because it was designed to be worked on in a collaborative environment, it had a fundamentally different architecture than Adobe products, which are designed for single-person use. And so Adobe needed something for the future and a defensive capacity. And critically, Figma is cash flow positive. So once you buy it, it doesn't continue to leach from your cash flow. And I think that is a pretty important distinction. And it's growing at about 100% per year. So 100% per year growth. Sure, it's expensive, but you're only betting 13 to 14% of the company. I think it's a great move. I think investors are being morons. I love it.
I think your point, Alex,
it's defensive, right? I mean, go ahead, Carolina.
No, I was just going to say the point that Alex just made about the back end and how that is organized for true collaboration, I think it is critical, right? Because that might actually well be one of the reasons for Adobe acquisition, because they can take then their products as well, a use of the same backend, presumably, or parts of it, to deploy that for better collaboration, even on their products. Because this is when we talk hybrid work, everybody gets fixed on you're in the office, you're at home. That's not really what it is. The hybrid work is how you work and how much more in the cloud our workflows are. And this is not going away, right? So for Adobe to be part of that, to empower people to truly collaborate in this new environment, I think this seems like a very good shortcut.
Yeah. The sad thing, though, Carolina, is that I think it's a smart deal from Adobe's perspective, right? Like, to me, they had to pay a premium on the lost private valuation. We all expected it to go for a relatively high amount given the quality of the business itself, et cetera.
Right.
But I'm bummed that Figma didn't turn them down and try to kill them, because the whole point of startups, like why I care about them, why I watch these little baby companies, is because they potentially grow up to become incumbent killers. And in this case, Adobe used historically hoarded wealth, which is fine, it's a corporation, to essentially buy out the competition. And so we're not going to see Adobe get superseded. We're going to see Adobe more entrenched. And that just makes me kind of sad.
Isn't that one reason Lena Khan and the FTC may stop this? They're looking at Facebook's acquisition of Instagram, same thing, to kill a rival. And they're wishing they could roll that back. They're wishing they had looked at it a little bit more closely when it happened. For it was $1 billion. I remember we were
blown away,
aghast at $1 billion. So do you think this new regulatory attitude in Washington might stop this for that reason alone? Because it is about to put a competitor out of business?
Yeah, the only thing I'll say is here, and I know Mike has a strong opinion, and I want to get his take on why he's so positive on the deal going through. But the reason why I would be in that direction is that no one talks about Adobe in Washington. If you read transcripts of congressional hearings and so forth, it's the big 5 American companies and TikTok.
Yeah.
And I don't recall Adobe showing up once. It's kind of a sideshow because it's not a platform in the operating system sense. It doesn't have a social network that politicians can grandstand against. And so it kind of sits to the side and does its thing. So maybe Lena Khan will keep her fire focused somewhere else. And if she does, then it goes through. I never thought I'd be, voting for an opinion here, but like I hope she does block it because then Figma would have to kind of go its own way and make me happier. I'm sure
Figma was poised to do an IPO and declined because of the bad environment for tech IPOs.
Give it 12 months. It's fine. I only know Dylan a teeny little bit. I had dinner sitting next to him at Sequoia once, I think, or maybe it was a different venture capital firm, one of them. And that was ages ago. And he was perfectly lovely. But I just want to say one last thing before I hand off to Mike to talk about the deal. But I live very much near Brown University, and Providence is claiming this one is ours. So rarely does my town come up in the news press. Here we are.
And take that, Cal. You turned him down, Cal. He was, we should point out, a Brown University dropout, however.
Close enough. He showed up here for a bit. He's had the coffee. It's fine.
Just as I'm a Yale dropout, and I don't think New Haven's welcoming me back with open arms. But anyway, the people who are really celebrating on Sand Hill Road, Index Ventures, Greylock Partners, and KP, those are the big VCs. I'm sure Peter Thiel still has a pretty big stake. They will all have a giant payday. And, of course, Dylan himself now in the 3 Comma Club. So, right. Mike, you have an opinion about this?
I want to support what Alex said, which is that basically antitrust, big antitrust action, big moves like blocking an acquisition like this has become political. And I don't think Washington has the understanding to basically, is kind of arbitrary to a certain extent what they block, and they tend to go after the big name social networks and the big tech giants, and they barely know who Adobe is. They don't really care that much. There's no constituents demanding that they stop their steamrolling of the industry. Nobody really cares about this, and so I think it's just going to go through simply because they want to pick their battles, and the battles that they want to have are with, Apple, Google, et cetera, Amazon.
Bigger fish to fry. It was only, 9 months ago that Dylan Field, the newly minted billionaire, tweeted, "Our goal is to be Figma, not Adobe."
And that is such a soft statement to say against a competitor. He probably had in the back of his mind at all times that this could be a significant possibility. And so, even after the acquisition, even during the announcement, both they and Adobe are saying we're going to keep their independent cultures. They're essentially saying exactly what that tweet said.
Yeah.
And so it was really, the press is making that tweet sound like it's a shot over Adobe's bow in the past. It's nothing of the kind. It's a very, very anodyne, harmless thing to say.
I've also heard it said that you don't want the government to block this one because, and I'm sure this is a venture capitalist who said this, you really want to have people have that opportunity for the big exit because that gets more people to do startups. Do you think that's fair?
I think that's baloney and annoying. Go public. Make your own exit.
Okay, and, I like it. I agree.
You don't have to sell to an aging giant that barely pulled off a SaaS transition to have the Silicon Valley model work. In fact, that's not how the majority of the wealth was made in Silicon Valley. It was made via IPOs of companies that ended up becoming new giants, not selling out for a smaller dollar amount than you could in another 2 or 4 years. Not that I blame Dylan for collecting the bag, to be clear. Like, shout out. If someone offered me $20 billion, I would sell my kidneys.
It's pretty hard.
Both of them.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to turn that down, even if you think, well, I might make more next year. That's hard to say no to. And I'm sure Greylock and KP are kind of, Dylan, we'll be very happy if you would accept that, right?
But this is what Silicon Valley has become, much more short term. They all want the next thing. And they don't have a lot of patience for the current thing. And this is true of Dylan. He's going to, like I said, in a couple of years, 2-3 years, he's going to have another startup that he wants to be a hot startup. And of course, all the venture money wants to just turn that around. This is a big payoff for them, bigger than they probably expected. And they want to take that money and invest in the next, such thing. And they want to accelerate. And so this is kind of, the days in which, a bunch of engineers leave Fairchild Semiconductor and found Intel. That world has been transformed into a much faster, much shorter term thinking kind of a culture. At the same time, because of that culture, because it's kind of toxic, there are lots of new entrepreneurs who are trying to avoid VC and are trying to bootstrap their operations, make revenue right away. This was almost one of them, because they're actually not, they're not like Uber or something like that, just burning cash. They were actually making money. But a lot of companies are trying to do that without the VC pressure. So the VCs are pushing for this sort of exit, and somebody like Dylan is probably pushing for this kind of exit. It's a bummer for all the legions of fans of this platform, and also the employees of this company who are kind of missionaries. They're they've really been on a mission to change how digital collaborative work happens. And so it's kind of a bummer for them to a certain extent, but this is how Silicon Valley works. I mean, this is the best case now scenario for Silicon Valley. This is Silicon Valley working the way most people who are serious players in Silicon Valley want it to work.
Well, Figma was a huge success in terms of market share. They had 77% market penetration for product design tools. And that's got to be what scared Adobe. Adobe had a competing product, Adobe XD, which really hadn't gained the same kind of traction. It must have scared them that they could get their lunch eaten. And I know a lot of designers who were very unsettled by this, who love Figma, hate Adobe, and are not happy about it.
It was a very Facebook-like acquisition where they had a really hot competitor, upstart, who they tried to compete against, failed, and so they just bought them. And this is the Facebook playbook. They copy the rival, and then when that doesn't work, they buy them.
Hunter Walk, who's a smart seed capital VC, pointed out that when Cruise got snapped up by GM 6 years ago, people said $1 billion plus. Wow. But the answer was the same as with this acquisition. If autonomy is the potential future of your auto industry, you're not strong in that area, what percent of your market cap is it worth to acquire what could be the thing that's going to put the nail in your coffin? Right.
Yeah.
For GM, it was 2.5% of their market cap. It's even bigger for Adobe, but I think it is an existential crisis for Adobe.
Can I just weigh in here quickly? Hunter Walk is a friend of mine and a really lovely human, so it's fun to see him kind of crop up on TWiT. Rare is the time in which that part of my work life kind of ends up on the show. But I want to say one thing about the acquisition and how it's being structured. And I just double checked this. According to Adobe, Dylan's going to stay the CEO of Figma, but he's going to report to David Wadhwani, who is the president of Adobe's digital media business. He's not reporting to the CEO.
To the CEO.
Is that, what's that?
Yeah, I said the same. He's not reporting to the CEO.
So what does that mean?
It means he's playing for the JV team. I mean, like, he's down an entire layer of management, which is no freaking joke at a big company. Carolina can back me up here or not, but like, when I read that, I was just perplexed. Like, why do you spend this much of your market cap and then put it underneath a lieutenant? Why doesn't it report to the actual boss?
I think it could
Especially if you're saying that they're going to stay independent and basically you want them to continue to operate the way that they have been. Right. You can only do that if you got the CEO backing you.
That's a clear signal they're not, that they're going to put Dylan up on the roof having lunch with the other guys, and they're going to suck Figma into the creative cloud, and that's that, And Dylan, I hope you enjoy your 3-year handcuffs, and then the problem is, I'm sure Dylan, he's 30 years old, he's a young guy, thinks, I could do it again. The case of people actually doing that is the numbers of I think it's pretty low, right? Their timing is so impeccable. You came up with the right idea at the exact right time. It couldn't have worked better. The chance of that happening, that's like lightning in a bottle, right? Or no?
Well, you're right. You're right that it's rare to have another mega hit, but he also has the leisure to pursue his passions and remain a billionaire.
Yeah, he might want to sail,
go back to the drone thing.
America's Cup yachts, or build drones, and exactly.
Right.
Yeah.